Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. It's great to see you. I'm just going to start in a couple of minutes. We're going to be talking about get out the vote. It's going to be awesome. You're in the right place if you want to talk about get out the vote today. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as you're coming in. It'd be great to know who you are, what organization you're with. That's what's really awesome about these webinars. We always get to meet other like-minded people in the progressive space. And I'm also going to put out a poll just to see what brings you here today as well. So yeah, please introduce yourself in the chat. And we will be sending out the recording of this session. Thank you, Mark. I will go over all of that shortly. Thanks everyone. If you're just starting to join, welcome to A Recipe to Win the Midterms. Please introduce yourself in the chat as we wait for everyone to join. And we're going to start in a couple of minutes and then I will launch a poll. Okay, so as we just wait for a couple more people to join us, I have launched a poll and we're just curious to know what brings you here today. Whether you are, maybe you're interested in get out the vote, but haven't started your campaign yet, or you have a plan, but are looking for more tips. Maybe you're interested in get out the vote messaging. As we are waiting for everyone to join, we'll just love to know your thoughts and know why you're here. And also if you're interested in get out the vote digital tools, that's an option as well. So you can choose multiple, it's not just one choice, you might be here for many reasons. So please let us know. And we're just gonna wait a couple more minutes while people are joining. All right. So yes, I am going to start us off and I will end the poll when I want to introduce the topic. I just want to do a bit of some housekeeping first. So welcome to A Recipe to Win the Midterms, Messaging and Methods to Get Out the Progressive Vote. My name is Abby. I'm the Community Marketing Specialist at NewMode. And as you're joining us, if you could answer our poll, that would be great. It would be wonderful to know why you're here today. And before we get into it, I just wanted to start by doing a territory acknowledgement. So I live on the unceded ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, which is also known as Vancouver, Canada. So in Canada, this Friday is the National Truth and Reconciliation Day, where we reflect upon and recognize the devastating impact of residential schools to Indigenous people. So I just want, and we're going to honor and celebrate the residential school survivors and those who are lost. So this is happening on Friday, but we really, at NewMode, it's important for this to be top of mind every day. So I encourage you, if you're not already doing so, to reflect, please, on how you can contribute to decolonization efforts in your personal and your professional lives. So now I'd like to just transition into the event, and I'm going to end the poll shortly. So if you wanted to put your answers in while you're here today, that would be great. All right. Okay, So it looks like a lot of people here are really interested in get out the vote messaging and interested in get out the vote tools. And some of you have already started a get out the vote plan, which is great. And many of you haven't started. So this is perfect. This is all of you are in the right place. We're going to touch on all of this. So let's get into it. So we're here today to talk about the midterms elections, and we have some great experts to share their knowledge and to help you with your efforts in getting the progressive vote out. So for some housekeeping before we get into it, we're going to record this session. We are recording it and we will be sending it out. We're also going to send the slides out so you can be more present if you don't feel like you have to take as many notes, knowing that you're going to be receiving those slides. Please use the chat to engage with others. I said earlier, this is one of the best things about New Mode events is all of us are working towards progressive goals, like-minded folks. So it's a great way to meet others, maybe ask some questions to each other. That being said, if you have a question for the panelists, please use the question and answer button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. So you'll see two little chat bubbles, Q&A. That's where we're going to be keeping track of the questions. And some will be answered live at the end, and some will be answered throughout. So we're going to hear from each panelist and then do questions at the end. All right, so our first presenter is Anant. He is the Director of Community Experience, and he has over 9 years of experience in client success and customer support leadership. He understands the importance of having an internal advocate for customer needs and is always trying to guide companies into building customer-first organizations. With extensive experience in marketing and media agencies, his focus is on finding values for clients that need measurable returns in their marketing spend. So Anant works with a lot of our subscribers with their campaigns. And so we're really excited to hear from Anant today. Thanks, Anant.
Thank you, Abby. So go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so as Abby said, I'm the Director of Community Experience at New Mode, and today I wanted to talk about how content and messaging shift in an election year based on the campaigns of some of the wonderful organizations we work with. To start, I want to talk about two assumptions. The first is that engaged supporters drive successful get out the vote campaigns, and to get engaged supporters, you need relevant campaign content that creates and drives them. So what I'll be showing you from a New Mode perspective is what content categories engage these supporters during an election year, and when do these categories change? Just to briefly talk about the data we're looking at, it's going to be from the 2020 election year in the US. Campaigns, if you're not familiar with the New Mode platform, we provide a series of multi-channel advocacy engagement tools like letters to representatives, editors, phone calls, and media. And engagement in this case is going to be calculated by the number of submissions to each of these forums. It's simplistic, but I wanted to keep it high level. The data is not indicative of a normal election year, but you can also argue that no election year moving forward is going to be normal. And I also just want to say that while we're going to be looking at a lot of graphs and data, those numbers represent the effort, passion, and sacrifice of a lot of real people working towards a lot of really important causes. And the reason I feel comfortable presenting this is because I know I'm talking to people who are only, their only work is further the causes of those people. So just to start off with, I wanted to see when campaigns are launched during an election year, assuming that the election date is November, as it was in 2020. So as you can very clearly see, things started ramping up in March, but the most number of actions were launched during these months in May, July, and then just before the November election, there was a little bit of a peak in October. And then during the election cycle, no one's launching campaigns. Everyone, organizations, supporters, activists, they're all too busy with the actual election. So does this match up with when supporters are engaged? Like, are people actually engaging this far out, 6 to 7 months out before the election? So if we compare that, you can see, yes, so the blue line indicates the number of submissions by supporters to all these campaigns. And you can see we had a huge spike of submissions in June and another one in October, just before the election. Also want to keep in mind that George Floyd was murdered in May, which caused a huge spark of outreach, activism for civil rights. So that did contribute to this, this large spike in engagement. But even without that, there's quite a lot of engagement this far out from an election. I also want to talk about some of the categories of the content. I've divided it into some high-level ones. We could have gone really deep into like, environment or civil rights, things like that. But I wanted to keep it simple. So awareness, impact, and then a few election-related categories. So what do I mean by awareness and impact? An awareness campaign we can define as a campaign where the primary goal is to raise awareness, get the message out, incentivize easy sharing. It's not necessarily tied to a specific piece of legislation. It's more part of your theory of change in a general sense. And yeah, the main intention really is to spread the message. An impact campaign, on the other hand, asks people to participate and request a very specific outcome from decision makers, things like pass or repeal a piece of legislation, the release of someone unfairly imprisoned, etc. I've highlighted Color of Change here because, first of all, they do incredibly important work, but they also have so many great examples of campaigns with a very direct impact. So we talked about how supporters are the most engaged in June and October. So I want to go into what kind of campaigns are being launched, what the content of those campaigns are, and how do supporters react to that content. So just in a standard month, no elections, 80% of submissions on New Mode are in awareness campaigns and 20% are in impact campaigns. Organizations create more impact campaigns, but awareness campaigns are just easier to participate in. But impact campaigns actually get higher engagement when run beside awareness campaigns. So, you get a whole lot of people who are sharing easy to share campaigns saying, yes, I agree with this. And then those people are then much more likely to participate in the harder asks to the impact campaigns. So how does this shift during an election year? In June 2020, organizations were launching awareness campaigns, almost the biggest majority of them, followed by impact campaigns. And then you'll notice that election-related campaigns are actually the minority in June. So 6 to 7 months out, they're just starting work on election campaigns. Election legislative priorities basically means, can you sign this or can you send a letter to decision makers saying, this is what I want the biggest priorities for the election to be, whether that's climate or justice reform, democratic reform, or Supreme Court. This is the one thing I care about the most during this election. Does supporter engagement match this? Are the most people participating in awareness campaigns? Let's have a look. The blue bars here represent what kind of content supporters have submitted the most to. And you can see it's actually quite different from what the actions organizations are launching. The two biggest blue bars, the biggest spikes in supporter engagement, are actually election-related issues. So yes, even 6 to 7 months out, people care about elections. It's what they care about the most when it comes to digital campaigns. And this is what they interact in the most. The biggest spike was legislative priorities, which I just talked about. The second biggest was actually election ballot legislation, talking about these are the specific pieces of legislation I want to make sure are on the ballot. You can also see there's a small spike in federal legislation. People are starting to understand more. They're educating themselves, they're learning more. And so now they're participating more in the harder to understand campaigns surrounding federal legislation. So yeah, just a quick takeaway: 6 months before election, organizations switched to awareness campaigns as the biggest priority, but supporters overwhelmingly prioritize election-related campaigns to participate in. Let's talk about 1 month before the election, which is basically the situation a lot of you folks are in right now. Organizations are launching a spread of actions almost evenly. They've switched to impact campaigns as the biggest content priority. Legislative priorities are now still pretty big. And federal legislation awareness actually take a back seat. Once again, is this what we would expect supporters to be engaged in? Do they still care about legislative priorities? Do they care about impact on the election process? 1 month out, the most surprising thing is that there's very little engagement from supporters on election legislative priorities. While there's a huge spike in impact and there's a big spike in federal legislation. I don't want to theorize too much, but based on some of the organizations we've talked to and some of the campaigns that we've seen, we get the impression that supporters right now, 1 month before the election, they're amped up. They really want to see change. They really want to see impact, and asking them to sign a general election legislative priorities, they feel it's too late. People kind of already know what they want their priorities to be. So now what they really want to see is impact. They want to see, direct theory of change. So yeah, this is just a summary of that. Huge drop in support engagement and legislative priority campaigns, interest in impact campaigns, and supporters and organizations are seeing beyond the election, so to speak. They're looking at federal legislation that is going to be carried out after the election. One minor thing as well, the biggest spike in federal legislation was driven by environmental groups. I just thought that was interesting. Well, the biggest spike in impact campaigns were civil rights groups. Just want to do some final takeaways. It's never too late. Even up to a month before the election, people are eager to participate and take action. Elections create a spike of interest and knowledge in federal legislation and high impact issues. I talked about pairing impact and awareness campaigns along with the Get Out the Vote campaigns. A study by the Analyst Institute found that those who engage in multi-channel advocacy have a 50% higher turnout rate than the vote propensity score would suggest. In simple terms, if you're getting people to participate in more types of actions, they're more likely to vote. And during an election cycle, people are interested in legislative priorities, but directly before the election, people care more about tangible outcomes. So that was everything. I know it was quite a lot, so thank you, folks. We will be giving these slides away as takeaways too, so I hope the numbers, you'll have a lot more chance to go through the numbers then. Thank you.
Thanks, Sanat. That's awesome. Yeah, I really appreciated seeing everything visually like that. So I love that. Thanks. We're going to move on to Avalanche Insights. So Avalanche Insights, they unlock the power of open-ended data at scale. And they do that, they help people understand customers and users, understand voters and employees through their data collection. So this is messaging. This is the messaging part. Everyone seems to be really looking forward to that. It was the highest answered on the poll. And I want to introduce Wasay and Will. Wasay joined Avalanche Insights in October 2019, bringing research-based expertise in message and issue framing, branding, positioning, and campaign advocacy. Since he has helped to shape Avalanche's research and electoral politics and climate change. Prior to joining Avalanche, Wasay conducted public affairs research for large technology companies and public narrative research on transitional justice. And then Will is an educator, organizer, creative, and policy nerd. He brings to Avalanche over a decade of experience helping other humans develop themselves and exploring the power of true stories to make our world fair for once. So I want to introduce the two of them. Please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Abby. I am going to pull up our slides here. Give me just 1 second. Actually, before I do that, just want to talk a little bit about Avalanche real quick. Abby gave a great description. That's pretty much what we do. We work a lot with text data, unstructured data to kind of make sense of the why behind so many of the perceptions that people hold. There's a lot of ways to derive why people might believe things. You can do multivariate analysis, but sometimes with qual, you can just simply ask why people believe certain things. And that can be pretty powerful too. So I'm going to walk us through a little bit of data, and then Will is going to take us through our messaging workshop. Let me show the slides now. Go to slideshow. Cool. So what we're pulling from here is basically the last few months of research. Not all of it, not all the data is completely public, but we've tried to pull any of the key takeaways that really might be salient at this time. So this is messaging for the midterms. And before we dive into the actual messaging, just want to kind of provide the context.
Sorry, just to interrupt. It says loading still on the screen. So
give me 1 second.
No problem.
There it is.
Can you see the slide that says messaging environment?
No, once you press share, it's just loading.
Okay.
To...
Will, it might be my screen. Do you have access to the?
Yeah, let me give it a try.
Sorry, folks.
No worries.
Okay, give me 1 second. I want to show you the middle of the presentation.
While Will is pulling that up, I can get started with some of the highlights in the beginning of the story. So the environment that we're in, unsurprisingly, we measure emotional and sentiment data quite a bit at Avalanche. And it's probably not a huge surprise to say for the last 5 or 6 months, anxiety and concern have been off the charts, very, very high, and that is largely related to fears and concerns about cost of living. This is an open-ended data that we ask pretty frequently. We track it over time. What do you most fear will happen in America in the next year that would make things harder for people like yourself? And between March and the last time we fielded this, like a month ago, concerns about higher costs and rising costs of living have increased. We are starting to see some signs that this might be starting to taper off a little bit, but still, unsurprisingly, the top thing that concerns people in this moment is rising costs of living, followed by the second theme a little bit further down in the chart, which shows people talking about politics and the opposing political party. As we get closer to the election, that kind of language starts to spike a lot more. Let's go to the next slide. So we asked this question in a couple different ways. This is a closed-ended question. If the Democratic Party wins the House and the Senate in the midterm elections, what difference, if any, do you think it will make? We asked this both for the country and in your life. And between those two at the all sample level, there's not actually that great of a difference. 32% of people say a significant difference for the country, 31 in your life, 27 say some difference, and 29, the same 29% in your life. However, when you look at this cut by vote choice, you start to see some interesting differences. Strong Biden voters, these are people who showed up and enthusiastically voted for Joe Biden in 2020. A clear majority, 59%, say it will make a significant difference for the country, but in their own lives, it's actually only 51%. That top box number, what we refer to as top box, which here is a significant difference, is particularly high for strong Biden. But when you look at soft Biden voters, it drops to 20% for the country and 18% in your life. This is the enthusiasm gap showing up that has showed up in so many different ways. The lukewarm kind of sentiment that we kind of have to try and overcome as we get closer to the election. We also asked the same structure of questions for the Republican Party. So if the Republican Party wins the House and the Senate in the midterms, what difference do you make? Would it make in the country and in your life? Here in particular, I want to zoom in and focus on soft Biden voters. These are people who say they voted for Joe Biden, but weren't necessarily enthusiastic about doing so. They are more animated when it comes to these questions. They're 15 points more likely to say Republicans winning will make a significant difference for the country, 10 points more likely to say it will make a significant difference in your life. And we can presume that that has to do with a negative difference, of course. Let's go to the next slide. Just to kind of round out the set of slides that talk about the environment, we've also been in the field with canvassed voters. So basically on a bi-weekly basis, field programs who are knocking on doors are providing us data from what they're hearing from voters across a handful of battleground states in the US. Key things to kind of pay attention to is that there's a reported uptick in anxiety and concern, again, largely driven by fears related to cost of living. What's really important to focus on here is that we can't just kind of fudge our way around this. We have to acknowledge the hardship that people are feeling. We want to emphasize, though, that voters have helped to overcome great challenges like this in the past, and we should be using recent wins as proof points that voters can do it again. Abortion and reproductive freedom is really, really an increasingly salient topic. It's more voters are talking about it. It's something that can inspire defiance among voters, and we should again use proof points to show how voters can protect these rights right now. Lastly, there are a handful of specific candidates, Gretchen Whitmer, Mark Kelly, and Fetterman in these states that are starting to show up, and their stories are in particular coming through as points of contrast to the GOP archetypes of selfishness and self-promotion in particular. Let's go to the next slide. I'm going to quickly go over this and then kick it over to Will, but there's a lot more data available around what this slide in particular is about. We tested arguments for the election, so the case for Democrats and for the case for Republicans. We tested 4 cases for Democrats, 4 cases for Republicans. I'm not going to read all of these right now for time, but just to emphasize the case for Democrats in particular that we tested, there's one around fairness and justice. This is the one that recognizes that voting isn't actually going to solve all of our problems, but we have a chance to make our country more fair and just for everyone. There's another case that is around care and fighting for. It lists specific issues like cost of living, climate change, paid family leave. And then we have 2 cases that are more focused on loss aversion. So we have a case around Trump Republicans taking us backwards and another on stopping Republicans from passing a national ban on abortion. Let's go to the next slide and see how these cases are performing. So while abortion rights and reproductive freedom are a rising and more salient concern, what we're finding is that on its own, it's not the most motivating argument for Democrats. In fact, the fairness and justice for all message wins among all Americans, followed by care and fighting for, then the Trump Republicans message, and then reproductive freedom. This is not to say that reproductive freedom is not incredibly salient, but when we talk about Democrats and what they are going to be able to do for voters, we actually see that this fairness and justice frame and this care and fighting for frame is also really, really salient and important to focus on. Fairness and justice in particularly is important for soft Biden voters. Okay, just to highlight quickly here, we also cut this data by the generic ballot. So who are you going to vote for in 2022? And among undecided voters, people in the middle, you can see in the middle of the chart there, that fair and justice message, 42% of undecided voters select that one. Among Republican cases, I didn't really go over them, but the message that resonates the most is the one that's focused on results, getting shit done, that kind of vibe. And that is what resonates among undecided voters. Let's go to the next slide. Just to round out how we really think about messaging and what wins at Avalanche is through an emotional activation framework. For all the messages and cases that we test, there are messages that are activating emotionally. There are messages that are inhibiting on the left-hand side of this chart. And in the middle, there are messages that drive fear or anxiety or concern. And what we found when we matched that data to the voter file is that those voters who express those emotions, particularly in the middle, can lean either way. Sometimes they will not show up to vote, and sometimes they will show up to vote. We really want to be putting messages out to voters that emotionally activate them and drive things like hope, urgency, anger, determination. Let's take a look at what this looks like for the cases that we tested. It's probably not a huge surprise, but the fairness and justice message and the care and fighting for messages are the most emotionally activating messages that we've tested. This was in this research. We've also seen it pretty consistently over the last few months in other research. Can be really, really motivating for some voters, but what we've found pretty consistently is that it's not going to be enough, and you have to really demonstrate to voters that you have another frame that is emotionally activating, that drives hope, urgency, and determination in particular. So just to kind of bring this all together, and then I'll kick it over to Will. We have a core narrative here that we've developed. It's not something that's you can like take and tweet right away, but there are elements in here that are salient and important to understand. You want to acknowledge real hardship. You want to frame the choice like, and while one election cannot solve everything, we have a clear choice to make. You want to draw contrasts, and then you want to channel determination. The final statement here is only Democrats can care enough to keep fighting to protect the freedoms we hold most dear, the freedom to decide our futures, the freedoms to live without fear of gun violence, freedom to breathe clean air and drink clean water, the freedom to thrive and care for our families. I'm going to kick it over to Will, who's going to take us through some of the more higher level messaging workshop elements here.
Thanks, Lasse. So some messaging best practices to guide you through Get Out the Vote and beyond. There's a lot of folks in politics who think of voters as sort of rational beings, but we all know that we all tend to respond emotionally. We tend to do things when we're emotionally involved, and we get emotional when we hear stories that we can connect to. And so when we're talking about what core narratives or what messages should do, is they should all connect to a broader story. And I'm going to go through each of the story elements here. The first is to lead with values. This is like exactly what Lasse was showing. The fact that the fairness and the care message frames performed better than the one that was about reproductive freedom makes a lot of sense, because the reproductive freedom one wasn't as grounded in values that people connect to first. Doesn't mean you can't do that. It just wasn't that way in the research that we did. So you always want to lead with a shared value that your voters can connect to. The second is to characterize the challenge. And the challenge is something that goes against the values that you're stating. So if you're talking about care, then harm the challenge should be something that is harming people. If you're talking about fairness, then cheating is what you're talking about. Yeah. And then you want to talk about who's causing that challenge or that problem. And you want to name the villain directly. And most importantly, this is a part that people leave out a lot when they just talk. You'll see messaging where it's like, we got to stop the big corporations. And that's it. But you got to say what it is that they're doing. We have to stop the big corporations who are motivated by greed to do this, et cetera. Then you want to have a clear protagonist and hero. And the hero should not be your candidate. It should be the people, the voters. Centering the voter in the story makes it so that when it comes to the point of choice in a story, that it's the voter's action, whether that's to go vote or to sign up to volunteer or whatever it is, it's up to them to do that. Then you want to name the solution, the thing that will happen if they make the right choice. So if you vote, we are more likely to move into, our country will be more hopeful. And if you don't, there's a risk of it going to despair, forward or backward, presenting a choice and framing it clearly. And then that solution should be attached to positive, specific outcomes. And here on the right, we have an image from a video that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's people made. And in the image, I think is a great example of this. You can see sort of a preserved historical building with solar panels being installed by unionized workers, and sort of technology enabling it all. And you can see the clean wind energy in the background and luscious greenery. And then you want to close with that call to action. This is the choice that the voter is making. They need to show up for that shift. So join your neighbors Saturday at 4 p.m. so we can plan together how we will protect the reproductive freedom in Wisconsin. Concrete, urgent, clearly connected to the solution, and something you can hold them accountable for. This is an example of a message that we developed for an organization called Parents Together that's advocating for a family's first agenda. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I want to specifically zero in on the villain and intent so you can see what that looks like. So the first paragraph is about how hard it is to raise children. The second one says it doesn't need to be this hard, but some politicians want to distract us from the solutions that would help by intentionally creating conflicts that divide parents, all to keep themselves in power and protect the profits of the big corporations. And there's just lastly some do's and don'ts on this. Use accessible language, persuade with a non-judgmental tone, speak to us and our rather than you, and then paint that picture and evoke with imagery like that video that AOC put out, and then write something you would speak out loud. And then let's go over to some don'ts. Don't persuade with arguments, persuade with stories. Speak to you and your, don't do that. Don't get lost in policy, long run on sentences, or use more words than you need. And really, really don't repeat opposition talking points, even to dispute them. Just doing that makes them seem, for some reason, more true to folks than if you just were to pivot to your own side. And lastly, how do we know this is working? First, articulate your goals, so you know who you're talking to persuade them, and then who you're trying to demobilize. And then use multiple performance metrics so you don't end up with a MIM. MIM is a most inoffensive message, and that's what happens when you just look for agreement. You have to also look to measure emotional resonance, whether people are prone to share the content, and then other dependent variables like changes in attitude, views, or behaviors. And that's it. Thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. I really, it's just so reassuring to know that the narratives that you're presenting are also backed in data. Or not just trying to guess. It's like you've done the work, you've done the research. And I also really enjoyed hearing about how narratives need to be attached to values. I think that's such an important one, and bringing in the story and evoking emotion. So thank you so much. That was really interesting. All right, let's move to CallHub. So CallHub is a campaigning platform with powerful voice and texting tools. And they have many tools, texting, voice broadcasting, email, and we're going to hear more about that from Emily. So Emily has a background in environmental campaigns. She worked with the Obama campaign in 2012 and many other advocacy progressive groups. She's originally from Arkansas and has been in DC for over 12 years and has been at CallHub since December. So Emily, we'd love to hear from you.
Hey all, great to be here. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, so we're gonna go over some GeoTV tips with CallHub and what we can do to help. So there I am. Like I said, or like Abby said, that's my background, and I'm from Arkansas. And if you didn't know, we're the Razorbacks, so I'm gonna need y'all to cheer for us against Alabama Saturday. Okay, thanks. Okay, so we're gonna get through this pretty quickly since we're running behind on time, and then, like I said, we'll send the slides and we can email, answer all the questions. My coworker Sam is also on here, and he can answer some questions on the chat. So, doors, canvassing. That's always the go-to. So we need to do that, but then we need to add on some technology to really get out the vote. So we want to go wide and not deep. Expand your search, not go too far into what you're doing depth-wise. So we're going to start in advance before GeoTV because you want to practice and get everything going so you don't have any issues when GeoTV starts. So you want to do a dry run and try all your channels. So you can make sure it's all working. So we're going to go over SMS tips first. Here is MMS. So you can see the different options here, SMS and MMS. This is sending pictures, GIFs, anything like that. This is the breakdown. You can do 160 characters in SMS and 1600. And then the other details. You can also send videos we just released. Here are some quick responses that you want to do. You want to respond quickly to the voters that you're texting with. So this is kind of an example. This happened recently. There was a complaint for the Beto campaign, and you can see here it was a legal suit. So again, I'll send this over. You can read through all this and see what happened, and see how we do automatic sweeping to get through all of those type of issues. So efficiency is kind of what we're known for. We have tools to make everything a lot easier. So you can see here we have automatic sweeping, recommended replies, questions, and link tracking. You can see here we do fast P2P, so you can click send all like a text broadcast, but also get replies in. We've checked that with multiple attorneys, and you can do that. No other company offers that thus far for texting. Now we're going to go over some calling tips. So we don't want to death spiral. Whenever you call someone, as soon as you hear the beep, you want to start talking to get the conversation going. So then you're not, hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? You're using time, and then it's going to disconnect, and you're not going to get, the outcome that you were hoping for. So go from the get-go and start talking to the voter that you outreach to. So we can also do internal transfers through our software. So the campaign that is set up by the admin campaign manager, you can have transfers within that, and they can assign the agent specifically for whomever to do that. But again, there's a live transfer within the software that you can use. So going through and making, lots of calls is going to look good for your volunteers. But also that doesn't mean that it's, qualitative and then it's going to be a great conversation or do anything of the purpose. So you want to have a good conversation and use the length of the call instead of how many calls. That will help. So, all the questions that the caller might have, you can keep having those questions going back and forth on the phone call, as well as texting while you're on the phone call to the person. So you can keep it open for any of the questions they might have. So we offer something recently we released called Spam Shield. So calls are labeled at around 900 to where it looks like spam. So the carrier cuts that number off. So you want to have a rotating number to make sure that that doesn't get cut off, because it'll tell you that it's going through when it's not actually going through or reaching the people that you're reaching out to. So we have changed that, and that's something we offer as well. That's great for outreach and will save you time and money. So quick review. We want to go wide, not deep. We want to expand canvassing, texting, calling, emailing, do everything instead of doing just canvassing or just texting. You have to expand everything to reach voters, constituents from all different areas, age group. Some people are going to text, some people are going to call, just depending. But texting is going to be picked up first. Someone's going to look at that first before an email that they're not going to see, or maybe not answer a call. But like I said, doing all of those will help you reach. So here are some tips that, MMS obviously is going to be more eye-catching if you're sending a photo or a GIF or a video, because that's interactive. You want to respond quickly on the P2P texting to keep the voter engaged in what you're doing. If they decide to opt out, take them off the contact list. There can be lawsuits if you keep contacting people that have wanted to be on the do not call list. And efficiency is key. Again, saving time and money, having your volunteers reach out to the voters. Calling tips, like I said, the death spiral. So as soon as the call is answered, you start talking, so it's not the back and forth and the call get dropped. The internal transfers that I mentioned for volunteers. An idea that I've used in the past on campaigns, tons of campaigns use it, is cardboard boxes. So every campaign has that. If you divide it into 3, you can make, little cubbies. You can put tape info for the volunteers on the inside. So it's kind of like a little office that they can make the calls. It's a little more private. The length is a metric instead of how many calls, and your spam. So that is key in the calling. Very key is the spam rating. So that's something you want to pay attention to and make sure that your calls are verified. So that's kind of a quick run through. Emily, I went over, here's my email address. We'll send out the slideshow, and then you can email me any questions or whatever you have going forward.
Wonderful. Thanks, Emily.
Yeah.
All right. So now is the time for questions. I would love for people to write in the bottom of the Zoom chat, or not the chat, there at the bottom of the Zoom screen, there's a Q&A bubble. So we can, people can fill those out. In the meantime, I was wondering if some of the panelists had questions for each other. I think I kind of have one for Emily. I'm wondering, when using Get Out the Vote technology, like what do you find is like the most effective method? What and how do you choose which method to use, like call or text or email?
So we recommend doing both. We have a feature in calling that you can send out text while you're on the phone. So you're kind of hitting them twice. You can do follow-up saying, hey, I missed you. Can you, call us back at this, whatever. So have all of that going, but also canvassing. At the end, canvassing is most important, but you can't do that with everyone. So the calling and the texting, that also gets through and is a way of doing a lot with a little amount of time.
Okay, right. And I guess a question then I have for Will or Wase, you know, hearing from Emily that being at the door is the most effective, how can we adapt the messaging tips that you've talked about when we're at the door? Is it best to like make scripts, or is it best to like how to start off the conversation and then integrate that messaging? I mean, I know you showed Will like a bit of a paragraph, but that's, you know, a way of communicating via text. So yeah, if you could speak to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, this is a good opportunity to clarify some of what I presented. So that framework of the sort of the story elements that I presented make up what every campaign should have, which is a core narrative. So when they think of your candidate or they think of your issue, they think of this story, and that's anchored in those shared values. And so depending on how well your core narrative has penetrated already your canvassers, and what the goal of the canvas is. If we're talking sort of closer to the election GOTV, you're trying to emotionally motivate people to get out the vote. So basically you want to call back, start with those values, and talk about what the actual choice that the person at the door is making is, and what the outcomes of that choice are. So if you show up next Tuesday, we'll have a chance to do this and this because we all share these values of this. And in terms of what those values are, that sort of depends on the context. But again, we're seeing sort of nationally fairness and freedom, and sort of that combo is pretty salient. Yeah, want to say anything to add there?
No, not necessarily. I think just one thing is like we've been seeing among mobilization groups in particular is just like if they're telling you something, like not to try to like bullshit your way around them. Like I think that this piece around acknowledging hardships, I think is like really, really salient. And that's the only thing that I would add. I think that there's a reason why that fairness message is starting to resonate. It's because people acknowledge that there's more at stake than just what immediately benefits them. So I'll leave it there. There's more.
That's actually, you raised a really important point, which is something that I've been seeing a lot in messaging that's out there right now, where it's sort of talking about the accomplishments of the current administration or the current Congress, without acknowledging that there's so much more left to do and talking about what doing those things will mean for people. We just talked about the track record. That'll work for some people, but we also know that a lot of people have not been really impacted by the track record that we've sort of made so far.
And then just a follow-up, somebody here has asked a question that I think is related to democracy. For the issue of democracy, what do you think of saying to voters, you know, those rich guys who stole your jobs and sent them to China, well, now they're stealing your vote. So that seems like maybe a narrative that you were trying to address, or maybe what not to do. So yeah, if you could speak to that, would be great.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a lot of testing on democracy. We haven't tested that in particular. And there's a debate raging about how much to emphasize democracy and the threats to democracy. I think what I will say is I don't think that would be an effective mobilization message. That could be part of something earlier in a cycle potentially, but I don't know if it'd be the best thing to say. But in terms of mobilizing folks, I would think that might cause a little bit of inhibition. You want to feel hopeful and determined going into an election. And when you know how rich the rich guys are, that could be pretty hard to feel that way if that's the thing that you're being told the day before the election.
Yeah, I would just say that a one click down, completely agree with Will. One click down from there is just that I think more effective than the rich, wealthy angle is what's happening with reproductive freedom. I think that is like a more accessible through line between what's at stake when you don't have your say. And I think that's a lot more, it's a rising and increasingly important thing that people are understanding, I think.
That makes sense. And another question that might relate to both of you, or if any other panelist wants to turn their camera on to answer, any way to make inflation numbers look better? That is, during pandemic, prices plummeted. Does that inflate inflation numbers? For example, should we be comparing prices to pre-pandemic prices? Would this make a difference or not?
I think it would make a negative difference to talk about any prices at all with any specificity. People aren't thinking about, when they're thinking about what they don't like about inflation. The one price that people tend to track is gas prices, but really other than that, it's just how you feel when you have less money at the end of the week or at the end of the month, the things you have to give up. And I think, like Wase said, like the most important thing is acknowledging that has been a hardship, and then also talking about the things that Democrats have done or progressives have done to help with folks to be able to afford whatever it is they need to afford, and talk about all the things that we plan to do that make it so that people can afford childcare, people can have paid family leave, talk about reinstating the child tax credit, whatever it might be, the things that we're proactively going to do that connect to those values.
And then another question, best way to verbalize vote tripling and making sure all campaigns are asking strong supporters to vote triple. I personally don't know what that means. So what is vote tripling?
I'm not sure if this is a question best answered by us. There's an organization called Vote Tripling, and what they have sort of tried to make work as a term is vote tripling, which is basically getting one voter to then sort of turn out two other voters or three other, I don't know what, two or three.
I'll jump in here. Vote tripling, they were vote tripling, they're now renamed as Vote Rev, by the way. No, Vote Rev, sorry, I'm being checked in a hotel, which is why I'm not doing this webinar right now. No, I'm done. I'm checking out. Okay, so vote tripling, and you should just ask for it. I mean, it's literally just saying like, hey, do you have 3 friends who would like to vote? Who you think you can talk to vote? And it's like, okay, what's their names? Joe, John, and Charlie. And then you just say, save those names, and then call them back later, you know, as a field, and then say, hey, did you talk to Joe, John, and Charlie? And did you get them out to vote? And it's a very simple, you know, basic relational stuff. But yeah, you should always be doing it with your hard supporters because it's going to increase some turnout from them. I will say, check out Vote Rev, though. They're doing a lot of cool other studies. Like they started with vote tripling, but now they've moved on to other interesting ways to do turnout, and they're doing some like RCTs and stuff. But yeah, it's just as simple as that. But you should always do it. Do it in your texts, do it in your calls. There's no easier way to increase turnout among your base than telling them to turn out 3 people.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sam.
One thing to add to that is absolutely. And then, but one thing you can do is rather than like, think of 3 friends who you might want to remind to vote, like think of 3 friends who are also struggling with this, who want the country to be better in this way.
Here.
Linking the actual voting to the story that you're telling.
That makes sense. And I think another term that's really related to that is like relational canvassing or relational organizing. So really utilizing your own base or like your own relationships to get them out to vote. So I'm really thankful to have learned that new term because I think I've known it, but just not with that language. So thank you, Trisha. And yeah, just another, I guess, like a good way to kind of end it here is that somebody here has said that they've used the voter hero narrative, and it's really feeling healing and meaningful for the outside canvasser and engaging. So it feels good for both the canvasser and the person. So that's very validating. Awesome. Thanks so much. Well, I think I'm going to start closing the webinar. Thank you so much to all of our speakers, New Mode, CallHub, and Avalanche Insights. We had a cameo there from Sam. He is at CallHub, in case any of you were wondering. And we're really thankful for all of you attending this webinar. And we will be sending out the recording of the session here along with the slides. And I think that is all. Oh, after you finish this webinar and you close out, Zoom will ask you to take a survey. We really appreciate your feedback. We'd love to know what other topics you're interested in learning about next. So it's just a 1-minute survey. So we'd love to hear your thoughts. And thanks again, everybody. And we will see you next time.
Thanks, Abby.
Thank you, Abby.
No
Thanks
worries.
everyone for joining.
Thanks, all. Bye.
Bye.